Okay, cool. So flowing. So what is flowing, right? Flowing is a very specific method that we use to track down your opponent's arguments as well as your own arguments on paper. So it's a very specific form of note-taking that we use mainly in debate. And flowing is extremely important to do in round because it helps you address every single issue in your speech from your opponents, right? So you're able to look at your paper and see that someone made this argument and you have to respond to it, or that your partner made this argument and you have to extend it, etc. It's just a good way to keep track of every single issue that's going on the round, whether you want to address it or not. And I mean, it can be very hard to remember these things, right? Just off the top of your head, which is why we flow. So the format and the specific method of flowing can vary based on the debate event and the number of speeches you're doing. But the one that I'll be kind of outlining today will be the one that you can use in our PF style that we'll be using for the tournament. So this is a sample flow from a debate and policy. It's actually one of my flows from a while ago. So you can see that there's a few columns and I've written notes down in different colors. We'll break down this flow and what flowing looks like visually later on, but I just want to point out that you can see that it gets kind of messy near the end, and there's a few arguments circled, and it's basically generally stylistically like it's my style, right? So you can flow however you want in your style too. It doesn't need to look exactly like this. It doesn't need to look exactly like any other person's flow. The most important thing about a flow is just that it helps you when you're debating so that you can just debate better. Yeah. So breakdown. In flowing, you'll typically have one column for every speech on a specific argument, and you'll have one sheet of paper for one specific argument. So by specific argument in our modified PF style for the tournament, it'll be your cases and constructives. So you'll have one sheet of paper for your AF constructive and one sheet of paper for your neg constructive. And then every time someone puts an answer on there or extends a point on that specific constructive, you write it down on that sheet of paper. So you're keeping those two arguments apart on two sheets of paper. Yeah, so two sheets, like I mentioned, and you're writing down what is said in that specific speech. So alternating colors, like different pen colors, can help you organize, although it's not completely necessary. You definitely can flow with just one color pen. Most people prefer to do two just because it helps visually keep the ideas apart and you know kind of who said what. And another important aspect of flowing is that you're going to want to try to line up arguments. So what that means is you want to horizontally align it to your original. So, okay, actually, so when you introduce an argument and you're writing it down, for example, if they respond specifically to that argument, you want to horizontally align it to your original one. And then you respond and you horizontally align it. So you can see across your paper, you're quite literally moving the argument from speech to speech. And that's how you understand how the argument is developing, if it's been dropped or not, what specifically went on in that interaction, and that will all help you kind of sum it up at the end of the round in your rebuttals as well. Right, so like I mentioned, it helps you track arguments and the interaction. So another key part of flowing is shorthand is extremely important. You don't want to copy down every single thing you hear. You don't even want to copy down a full tab, right? You only want to copy down the most important points. So the first part of shorthand is you want to be able to select certain words and phrases that you know when you read, you will be able to understand the full idea. The second thing is beyond just only writing down words, you want to develop kind of your own style of writing really quickly. So what I mean by that is using like different symbols, for example, or common abbreviations to make your flowing as quick as possible. For example, if I was gonna flow like, so if someone read a card that was like H-1B visas are key to the economy because they help stimulate innovation and increase the amount of technology that we can develop. So on my flow, I would just write down H-1B, and then I would write the letter key, and then the number 2, so key 2, that's short for key 2, and then I would say econ, short for economy, and I would move on. So that's what my shorthand looks like. People develop their own shorthand in their own different ways. It really just matters about how you can best read it. Okay, so we can go back to our example now. So I've labeled the speeches in each of the columns. So this column was the second AF speech. This was the second neg speech, third AF, third neg, and then fourth AF speech. So this was also a policy round, so it's maybe not in the format that you're used to. And In this specific round, I was also debating against some of my friends and my teammates, and it was more casual. So it was kind of set up in a way where we didn't need to flow the first two speeches. So that's why it's starting in the second ask speech. Typically, you would flow. Well, you would flow starting from the very first speech if you've never seen their arguments before. And another thing important to note here is kind of how it's being spaced out, right? So traditionally at the very beginning, at least, you want to keep a good amount of spaces in between each individual argument or each individual tag, right? So that's why it's kind of spaced out the way it is, at least on this column. You can see that some of the spaces are shorter than the others and some are longer. For example, this one is pretty long compared to the rest. That was just because I kind of knew like what my friends' arguments are like. I know what they're going to concentrate time on, so I just want to make the most amount of space for issues I think that they're going to talk about. Usually, because you'll be hitting someone you don't really know, you want to keep the spaces pretty even. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, actually, sorry. One more thing about this is that for the columns, you kind of want to make them as tight and closed off as possible. And this will also vary depending on the type of paper you have, how big your handwriting is, etc. But for the most part, you just want to keep it short, concise, and pretty close together so you have as much space as possible. And you can see here that I allocated a lot of space for the fourth ask speech, and that is because I'm giving the fourth ask speech, so I like to put the most amount of space in it so I can like actually write my arguments down, right? So for the first few pieces of this paper, I'm just taking notes, but for this one, I'm like writing it down, and then when I talk, I'm giving it straight off of my flow, which is why this has the most amount of space. Yeah, so that's pretty much the basics of flowing.